Ingram Cecil Connor III was born on November 5, 1946 in Winter Haven, Florida, to Ingram Cecil Coondog Connor and Avis Snively Connor. The Connors normally resided at their main residence in Waycross, Georgia, but Avis returned to her hometown in Florida to give birth. She was the daughter of a citrus fruit magnate, John A. Snively, who held extensive properties in Winter Haven and in Waycross. Graham's father, Ingram Connor II, was a famous World War II flying ace, decorated with the Air Medal, who was present at the 1941 attack on Pearl Harbor. Biographer Dave Meyer characterized these parents as loving. He wrote in 20,000 Roads that they are remembered as affectionate parents and a loving couple. However, he also notes that unhappiness was eating away at the Connor family. Avis suffered from depression, and both parents were alcoholics. Ingram Connor II died by suicide 2 days before Christmas in 1958, devastating the 12-year-old Graham, and his younger sister, also named Avis. His mother subsequently married Robert Parsons, who adopted Graham and his sister. They took his surname. Gram Parsons briefly attended the prestigious Bowles School in Jacksonville, Florida, before transferring to the public Winter Haven High School. After failing his junior year, he returned to Bowles, which had converted from a military to a liberal arts curriculum amid the incipient Vietnam War. For a time, the family found stability of sorts. They were torn apart in early 1965 when Robert became embroiled in an extramarital affair, and Avis' heavy drinking led to her death from cirrhosis on June 5, 1965, the day of Graham's graduation from Bowles. As his family was disintegrating around him, Parsons developed strong musical interest, particularly after seeing Elvis Presley perform in concert on February the 22nd, 1956 in Waycross. 5 years later, barely in his teens, he played in rock and roll cover bands such as the Pacers and the Legends, headlining in clubs owned by his stepfather in Winter Haven and Polk County area. By the age of 16, he graduated to folk music, and in 1963 he teamed up with his first professional outfit, the Shilohs, in Greenville, South Carolina. Heavily influenced by the Kingston Trio and the Journeymen, the band played hootenannies, coffee houses, and high school auditoriums, as Parson was still enrolled in prep school. He only performed with the group in select engagements. Forays into New York City, where Parsons briefly lived with a female folk singer in a loft on Houston Street, included a performance at Florida's exhibition in the 1964 New York World's Fair, and regular appearances at the Café Raffio on Bleecker Street in Greenwich Village in the summer of 1964. Although John Phillips, an acquaintance of Shiloh's George Wrigley, arranged an exploratory meeting with Albert Grossman, the impresario balked at booking the group for a Christmas engagement at the bitter end when he discovered that the Shilohs were still high school students. Following a recording session at the radio station of Bob Jones University, the group reached a creative impasse amid the emergence of folk rock and dissolved in the spring of 1965. Despite his middling grades and test scores, Parsons was admitted to Harvard University's class of 1966 on the basis of a strong admissions essay. Although he claimed to have studied theology, an oblique reference to his close friendship with his residential tutor, Harvard Divinity School graduate student Jet Thomas, in subsequent interviews, Parsons seldom attended his general education courses, before departing in early 1966 after one semester. He did not become seriously interested in country music until his time at Harvard, where he heard Merle Haggard for the first time. In 1966, he and other musicians from the Boston folk scene formed a group called the International Submarine Band. After briefly residing in the Kingsbridge section of the Bronx, they relocated to Los Angeles the following year. Following several lineup changes, the band signed to Lee Hazelwood's LHI Records, where they spent late 1967 recording Safe at Home. The album contains one of Parsons' best-known songs, Luxury Liner, and an early version of Do You Know How It Feels, which he revised later in his career. Safe at Home would remain unreleased until mid-1968, by which time the International Submarine Band had broken up. By 1968, Parsons had come to the attention of the Byrds bassist, Chris Hillman, via business manager Larry Spector, as a possible replacement for band members following the departure of David Crosby and Michael Clark from the group in late 1967. Parsons had been acquainted with Hillman since the pair met in a bank during 1967, and in February 1968, he passed an audition for the band, being initially recruited as a jazz pianist, but soon switching to rhythm guitar and vocals. Although Parsons was an equal contributor to the band, he was not regarded as a full member of the Byrds by the band's record label, Columbia Records. Consequently, when the Byrds' Columbia recording contract was renewed on February 29, 1968, it was only original members Roger McGuinn and Chris Hillman who signed it. Parsons, like fellow new recruit Kevin Kelly, was hired as a sideman and received a salary from McGuinn and Hillman. Consequently, when the Byrds' Columbia recording contract was renewed on February 29, 1968, it was only original members Roger McGuinn and Chris Hillman who signed it. Parsons, like fellow new recruit Kevin Kelly, were hired as sidemen and received a salary from McGuinn and Hillman. In later years, this led Hillman to state, "Gram was hired. He was not a member of the Byrds, ever. He was on salary. That was the only way we could get him to turn up." However, these comments overlooked the fact that Parsons, like Kelly, was considered a bona fide member of the band during 1968, and as such was given equal billing alongside McGuinn, Hillman, and Kelly on Sweethearts of the Rodeo album, and in contemporary press coverage of the band. Being with the Byrds confused me a little. I couldn't find my place. I didn't have enough say-so. I really wasn't one of the Byrds. I was originally hired because they wanted a keyboard player. But I had experience being a frontman, and that came out immediately. And Roger McGuinn, being a very perceptive fellow, saw that it would help the act, and he started sticking me out front. That was Gram Parsons reflecting on his time with the Byrds. Sweetheart of the Rodeo was originally conceived by band member Roger McGuinn as a sprawling double-album history of American popular music. It was to begin with bluegrass music, then move through country and western, jazz, rhythm and blues, and rock music, before finally ending with the most advanced, for the time, form of electronic music. However, as recording plans were made, Parsons exerted a controlling influence over the group, persuading the other members to leave Los Angeles and record the album in Nashville. Along the way, McEwen's original album concept was jettisoned in favor of a fully fledged country project, which included Parsons' songs such as 100 Years From Now and Hickory Wind, along with compositions by Bob Dylan, Woody Guthrie, Merle Haggard, and others. Recording sessions for Sweetheart of the Rodeo commenced at Columbia Records recording studio in the Music Row area of Nashville on March 9, 1968. Midway through the session, it moved to Columbia Studios Hollywood, Los Angeles. They finally came to a close on May 27, 1968. However, Parsons was still under contract to LHI Records, and consequently, Hazelwood contested Parsons' appearance on the album and threatened legal action. As a result, McEwen ended up replacing 3 of Parsons' lead vocals with his own singing on the finished album, a move that still rankled Parsons as late as 1973, when he told Cameron Crowe in an interview that McEwen erased it and did vocals himself and effed it up. However, Parsons is still featured as lead vocalist on the songs You're Still on My Mind, Life in Prison, and Hickory Wind. While in England with the Byrds in the summer of 1968, Parsons left the band due to his concerns over a planned concert tour of South Africa. And after speaking to Mick Jagger and Keith Richards about the tour, he cited opposition to that country's apartheid policies. There has been some doubt expressed by Hillman over the sincerity of Parsons' protest. It appears that Parsons was mostly apolitical, although he did refer to one of the younger African-American butlers in the Connor household as being like a brother to him in an interview. During this period, Parsons became acquainted with Mick Jagger and Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones. Before Parsons departed from the Byrds, he had accompanied the 2 Rolling Stones to Stonehenge, along with McEwen and Hillman, in the English countryside of Wiltshire. Immediately after leaving the band, Parsons stayed at Richards' house, and the pair developed a close relationship over the next few years, with Parsons reintroducing the guitarist to country music. According to Stone's confidant and close friend of Parsons, Phil Kaufman, the 2 would sit around for hours playing obscure country records and trading off on various songs with their guitars. Returning to Los Angeles, Parsons sought out Hillman, and the 2 formed the Flying Burrito Brothers with bassist Chris Etheridge and pedal steel player Sneaky Pete Kleinow. Their 1969 album, The Gilded Palace of Sin, marked the culmination of Parsons' post-1966 musical vision, a modernized variant of the Bakersfield sound that was popularized by Buck Owens, amalgamated with strands of soul and psychedelic rock. The band appeared on the album cover wearing nudie suits emblazoned with all sorts of hippie accoutrements, including marijuana, Tuinol, and Seconal-inspired patches on Parsons' suit. Along with the Parson-Hillman originals, Christine's Tune and Sin City, were versions of soul music classics The Dark End of the Street and Do Right Woman, the latter featuring David Crosby on high harmony. The album's original songs were the result of a very productive songwriting partnership between Parsons and Hillman, who were sharing a bachelor pad in the San Fernando Valley during this period. The atypical pronounced, for Parsons, gospel soul influence on this album likely evolved from the ecumenical taste of bassist Chris Etheridge, who co-wrote Hot Burrito No. 1, I'm Your Toy, and Hot Burrito No. 2 with Parsons, and frequent jamming with Delaney and Bonnie and Richards during the album's gestation. Original drummer Eddie Howe, best known for working with the Monkees and Al Kooper, unable to perform adequate takes due to an insipid substance abuse problem, and was dismissed after 2 songs, leading the group to record the remainder of the album with a variety of session drummers, including former International Submarine Band drummer John Cornell, who briefly joined the group as an official member, appearing on a plurality of the tracks, and Popeye Phillips of Dr. Hook and the Medicine Show. Before commencing live performances, the group ultimately settled upon original Byrds drummer Michael Clark. Technically maladroit in comparison to his predecessor, Clark's striking physical appearance proved to be the primary reason in this decision. An associate of the band would later recall, the Burritos had to be pretty, and Cornell didn't fit from that standpoint. While unsuccessful from a commercial standpoint, the album was measured by rock critic Robert Gastal as an ominous, obsessive, tongue-in-cheek country rock synthesis, absorbing rural and urban, traditional and contemporary, at point of impact. Embarking on a cross-country tour via train, as Parsons suffered from periodic bouts of fear of flying, the group squandered most of their money in a perpetual poker game and received bewildered reaction in most cities. Parsons was frequently indulging in massive quantities of psilocybin and cocaine, so his performances were erratic at best, while much of the band's repertoire consisted of vintage honky-tonk and soul standards with few originals. Perhaps the most successful appearance occurred in Philadelphia, where the group opened for the reconstituted Byrds. Midway through their set, Parsons joined the headline act and fronted his former group on renditions of Hickory Wind and You Don't Miss Your Water. The other Burritos surfaced with the exception of Clark, and the joint aggregation played several songs, including Long Black Veil and Going Back. The Flying Burrito Brothers appeared at the Sky River Rock Festival near Sultan, Washington at the end of August. After returning to Los Angeles, the group recorded the Train Song, written during an increasingly infrequent songwriting session on the train and produced by 1950s R&B legends Larry Williams and Johnny Guitar Watson. Despite a request from the Burritos that the remnants of their publicity budget be diverted to promotion of the single, it also flopped. During this period, Etheridge realized that he did not share Parson and Hillman's affinity for country music, precipitating in his departure shortly thereafter. He was replaced by lead guitarist Bernie Leadon, while Hillman reverted to bass. By this time, Parsons' own use of drugs had increased so much that new songs were rare, and much of his time was diverted to partying with the Stones, who briefly relocated to America in the summer of 1969 to finish their forthcoming Let It Bleed album and prepare for an autumn cross-country tour, their first series of regular live engagements in over 2 years. As they prepared to play the nation's largest basketball arenas and early stadium concerts, the Burritos played to dwindling nightclub audiences. On one occasion, Jagger had to beseech Parsons to fulfill an obligation to his group. As Parsons became a trust fund baby when he came of age, he was still receiving about $30,000 per year, equivalent to $210,000 in 2018, from his family trust fund during this period, distinguishing him from many hungry, hard-scrabbling peers. However, the singer's dedication to the Rolling Stones was rewarded when the Burrito Brothers were booked as one of the acts at the infamous Altamont Music Festival, playing a short set including 6 Days on the Road and Boning Maroney. Parsons left on one of the final helicopters and attempted to seduce Michelle Phillips. 6 Days was included in Gimme Shelter, a documentary of the event. With mounting debt incurred, A&M hoped to recoup some of their losses by marketing the Burritos as a straight country group. To this end, manager Jim Dickinson instigated a loose session where the band recorded several honky-tonk staples from their live act, contemporary pop covers in a countrified vein: To Love Somebody, Lodi, I Shall Be Released, Honky Tonk Women, and Larry Williams' Boney Maroney. This was soon scrapped in favor of a second album of originals on an extremely reduced budget. Faced with a dearth of new material, most of the album was hastily written in the studio by Leadon, Hillman, and Parsons, with 2 Gilded Palace of Sin outtakes thrown into the mix. The resulting album, entitled Burrito Deluxe, was released in April of 1970. Although it's considered less inspired than its predecessor, it is notable for the Parson-Hillman lead-on song Older Guys, and for its take on Jaggard and Richards' Wild Horses, the first recording released of this famous song. Parsons was inspired to cover the song after hearing an advanced tape of the Sticky Fingers track sent to Kleinau, who was scheduled to overdub a pedal steel part. Although Kleinau's part was not included on the released Rolling Stones version, it is available on bootlegs. Ultimately, and to the chagrin of Hillman, who was not keen on the song amid the band's creative malices, Jaggard and Richards consented to the cover version. Like its predecessor, Burrito Deluxe underperformed commercially. Disenchanted with the band, Parsons left the Burritos in mutual agreement with Hillman, who was long fatigued by his friend's unprofessionalism. Under Hillman's direction, the group recorded one more studio album before dissolving in the autumn of 1971. In a recent interview with American songwriter Chris Hillman, he explained that the greatest legacy of the Flying Burrito Brothers and Gram is we were the alternative country band. We couldn't get on country radio, and we couldn't get on rock radio. We were the outlaw country band for a brief period. Parsons signed a solo deal with A&M Records and moved in with producer Terry Melcher in early 1970. Melcher, who had worked with the Byrds and the Beach Boys, was a member of the successful duo Bruce and Terry, also known as the Ripcords. The two shared a mutual penchant for cocaine and heroin, and as a result, the sessions were largely unproductive, with Parsons eventually losing interest in the project. Terry loved Gram and wanted to produce him, but neither of them could get anything done, recalled writer and mutual friend Eve Babbitts. Long lost, the tapes from these sessions have gathered a legendary patina, writes David Meyer. The recordings stalled and the master tapes were checked out, but there is conflict as to whether Gram or Melcher took them. He then accompanied the Rolling Stones on their 1971 UK tour in the hopes of being signed to the newly formed Rolling Stones Records. By this juncture, Parsons and Richards had mulled the possibility of recording a duo album, moving into Villa Nicolte with the guitarist during the sessions of Excel on Main Street that commenced thereafter. Parsons remained in a consistently incapacitated state and frequently quarreled with his girlfriend, aspiring actress Gretchen Burrell. Eventually, Parsons was asked to leave by Anita Pallenberg, Richards' longtime domestic partner. Decades later, Richards suggested in his memoir that Jagger may have been the impetus for Parsons' departure, because Richards was spending so much time playing music with Parsons. Rumors have persisted that he appeared somewhere on the legendary album, and while Richard concedes that it is very likely that he is among the chorus of singers on Sweet Virginia, this has never been substantiated. Parsons attempted to rekindle his relationship with the band on their 1972 American tour to no avail. After leaving the Stones camp, Parsons married Burrell in 1971 at his stepfather's New Orleans estate. Allegedly, the relationship was far from stable, with Burrell cutting a needy and jealous figure, while Parsons squashed her beginning film career. Many of the singer's closest associates and friends claim that Parsons was preparing to commence divorce proceedings at the time of his death. The couple had already separated by this point. Parsons and Burrell enjoyed the most idyllic time of their relationship in the second half of 1971, visiting old cohorts like Ian Dunlop and family blind faith traffic member Rick Greck in England. With the assistance of Greck and one of the bassist's friends, a doctor who also dabbled in country music and is now known as Hank Wangford, Parsons eventually stopped taking heroin. A previous treatment suggested by William Burroughs proved unsuccessful. He returned to the U.S. for a one-off concert with the Burritos, and at Hillman's request went to hear Emmylou Harris sing in a small club in Washington, D.C. They befriended each other, and within a year, he asked her to join him in Los Angeles for another attempt to record his first solo album. It came as a surprise to many when Parsons was enthusiastically signed to Reprise Records by Mo Ostin in the mid-1972. The ensuing GP, 1973, featured several members of Elvis Presley's TCB band, led by lead guitarist James Burton. It included 6 new songs from a creatively revitalized Parsons, alongside several country covers, including Tom Paul Glacier's Streets of Baltimore and George Jones' That's All It Took. Parsons, by now featuring Harris as its duet partner, toured across the United States as Gram Parsons and the Falling Angels in February and March of 1973. Unable to afford the services of the TCB band for a month, the group featured the talents of Colorado-based rock guitarist Jock Bartley, soon to climb to fame with the Firefall, veteran Nashville session musician Neil Flans, on pedal steel, electric bassist Kyle Tullis, best known for his work with Dolly Parton and Larry Coryell, and former Mountain drummer N.D. Smart. The touring party also included Gretchen Parsons, by this point extremely envious of Harris and Harris' young daughter. Coordinating the spectacle as road manager was Phil Kaufman, who had served time with Charles Manson on Terminal Island in the mid-60s and first met Parsons while working for the Stones in 1968. Kaufman ensured that the performer stay away from substance abuse, limiting his alcohol intake during shows and throwing out any drugs smuggled into the hotel rooms. At first, the band was under-rehearsed and played poorly. However, they improved markedly with steady gigging and receiving rapturous responses at several leading countercultural venues, including Armadillo World Headquarters in Austin, Texas, Max's Kansas City in New York City, and Liberty Hall in Houston, Texas, where Neil Young and Linda Ronstadt sat in for a filmed performance. According to a number of sources, it was Harris who forced the band to practice and work up an actual set list. Nevertheless, the tour failed to galvanize sales for the GP, which never charted in the Billboard 200. For his next and final album, 1974's posthumous release Grievous Angel, he again used Harris and members of the TCP band for the session. The record generally received more enthusiastic reviews than its predecessor, although Parsons only contributed 2 new songs to the album, In My Hour of Darkness and Return of the Grievous Angel. He was reportedly enthused with his new sound and seemed to have finally adopted a diligent mindset in his musical career, limiting his intake of alcohol and opiates during most of the sessions. Before recording, Parsons and Harris played a preliminary 4-show mini-tour as the headline act in June 1973's Warner Brothers country rock package with the New Kentucky Colonels and Country Gazette. A shared backing band included former Byrds lead guitarist and Kentucky Colonel Clarence White, Pete Kleinau, and Chris Etheridge. On July 14, 1973, White was killed by a drunk driver in Palmdale, California, while loading equipment into his car for a concert with the New Kentucky Colonels. At White's funeral, Parsons and Bernie Leadon launched into an impromptu, touching rendition of Further Along. Parsons reportedly informed Phil Kaufman of his final wish to be cremated in Joshua Tree. Despite the almost insurmountable setback, Parson, Harris, and the other musicians decided to continue with plans for a fall tour. In the summer of 1973, Parsons' Topanga Canyon home burned to the ground, the result of a stray cigarette. Nearly all of his possessions were destroyed, with the exception of a guitar and a prized Jaguar automobile. The fire proved to be the last straw in the relationship between Burrell and Parsons, who moved into a spare room in Kaufman's house. While not recording, he frequently hung out and jammed with member of New Jersey-based country rockers Quacky Duck and his Barnyard Friends, and the proto-punk Jonathan Richman and the Modern Lovers, who were represented by former Byrds manager Eddie Tickner. Before formally breaking up with Burnell, Parsons already had a woman waiting in the wings. While recording, he saw a photo of a beautiful woman at a friend's home and was instantly smitten. The woman turned out to be Margaret Fisher, a high school sweetheart of the singer from his Waycross, Georgia days. Like Parsons, Fisher had drifted west and became established in the Bay Area rock scene. A meeting was arranged and the two instantly rekindled their relationship, with Fisher dividing her weeks between Los Angeles and San Francisco at Parsons' expense. In the late 1960s, Parsons became enamored of and began to vacation at Joshua Tree National Park, then a national monument, in southeastern California, where he frequently partook in psychedelics and reportedly experienced several UFO sightings. After splitting from Burnell, Parsons often spent his weekends in the area with Margaret Fisher and Phil Kaufman, with whom he had been living. Scheduled to resume touring in October 1973, Parsons decided to go on another recuperative excursion on September 17th. Accompanying him were Fisher, personal assistant Michael Martin, and Dale McElroy, Martin's girlfriend. Kaufman later declared that Parsons' attorney was preparing divorce papers for him to serve to Burrell, while the singer remained in Joshua Tree on September 20th. During the trip, Parsons often retreated to the desert, while the group visiting bars in the nearby hamlet of Yucca Valley, California, on both nights of their stay. Parsons consumed large amounts of alcohol and barbiturates. On September 18th, Martin drove back to Los Angeles to resupply the group with marijuana. That night, after challenging Fisher and McElroy to drink with him, Fisher didn't like alcohol and McElroy was recovering from a bout of hepatitis. He said, "I'll drink enough for the three of us," and proceeded to drink 6 double tequilas. They then returned to the Joshua Tree Inn, where Parsons purchased morphine from an unknown young woman. After being injected by her in room number 1, he overdosed. Fisher gave Parsons an ice cube suppository and later a cold shower. Instead of moving Parsons around the room, she put him to bed in room number 8 and went out to buy coffee in hopes of reviving him, leaving McElroy to stand watch. As his respiration became irregular and later ceased, McElroy attempted resuscitation. Her efforts failed, and Fisher, watching from outside, was visibly alarmed. After further failed attempts, they decided to call an ambulance. Parsons was declared dead on arrival at Yucca Valley Hospital at 12:15 a.m. on September 19, 1973, in Yucca Valley. The official cause of death was an overdose of morphine and alcohol. According to Fisher, in the 2005 biography, Grievous Angel, an intimate biography of Gram Parsons, the amount of morphine consumed by Parsons would be lethal to 3 regular users. Thus, he had likely overestimated his tolerance in light of his diminished intake, despite his extensive experience with opioids. Keith Richards stated in 2004 documentary film Fallen Angel that Parsons understood the dangers of combining opiates and alcohol and should have known better. Upon Parsons' death, Fisher and McElroy were returned to Los Angeles by Kaufman, who dispersed the remnants of Parsons' drugs in the desert. Before his death, Parsons stated that he wanted his body cremated at Joshua Tree and his ashes spread over Cap Rock, a prominent natural feature there. However, Parsons' stepfather, Bob, organized a private ceremony back in New Orleans and neglected to invite any of his friends from the music industry. 2 accounts state that Bob Parsons stood to inherit Gram's share of his grandfather's estate if he could prove that Gram was a resident of Louisiana, explaining his eagerness to have him buried there. To fulfill Parsons' funeral wishes, Kaufman and a friend stole his body from Los Angeles International Airport, and in a borrowed hearse, they drove it to Joshua Tree. Upon reaching the Cap Rock section of the park, they attempted to cremate Parsons' body by pouring 5 gallons of gasoline into the open coffin and throwing a lit match inside. What resulted was an enormous fireball. The police gave chase, but as one account puts it, the men were unencumbered by sobriety, and they escaped. Another telling indicates that the police did not give chase, but that Kaufman and a friend were presumably arrested for an open container, motor vehicle violation, and/or suspected DUI, and somehow escaped that arrest. The 2 were arrested several days later. Since there was no law against stealing a dead body, they were only fined $750 for stealing the coffin and were not prosecuted for leaving 35 pounds, 16 kilograms, of its charred remains in the desert. What remained of Parsons' body was eventually buried in Garden of Memories Cemetery in Metairie, Louisiana. The site of Parsons' cremation is today known as the Cap Rock parking lot. A local myth brings Parsons fans out to a large rock flake known to rock climbers as the Gram Parsons Memorial Hand Traverse. This myth was popularized when someone added a slab that marked Parsons' cremation to the memorial rock. The slab has since been removed by the U.S. National Park Service and relocated to the Joshua Tree Inn. There is no monument at Cap Rock noting Parsons' cremation at the site. Joshua Tree park guides are given the option to tell the story of Parsons' cremation during tours, but there is no mention of the act in official maps or brochures. Fans regularly assemble simple rock structures and writings on the rock, which the Park Service periodically removed. Stephen Thomas Erlewine of AllMusic describes Parson as enormously influential for both country music and rock, blending the two genres to the point that they became indistinguishable from each other. His influence could still be heard well into the next millennium. In his 2005 essay on Parsons for Rolling Stone magazine's 100 Greatest Artists list, Keith Richards notes that Parsons' recorded music output was pretty minimal. Nevertheless, Richards claims that Parsons' effect on country music is enormous, and adds that this is why we're still talking about him now. Well, I sure hope you found that video interesting, and if you did, why not give it a like and subscribe to the channel. We upload videos about twice a week, sometimes 3 times a week. We don't want you to miss a single one.